I just spent 2 weeks driving the new Mitsubishi Triton, and I'm happy to say it's generally awesome. Except when it's not. Now, I'm not going to pull any punches in this report. I was actually going to buy one. I was quite keen, but now, not so sure. So my strong advice to you, if you're on the fence about this, is do not buy the new Triton before you watch this report. I'm John Cadogan from AutoExpert.com.au. New cars cheap, but Australia only. Website. Card. Unlike most reviewers of this vehicle, whose videos you might watch, I actually own the predecessor. I've been living with that previous Triton since before the friggin' pandemic. It's one whole global pandemic ago. Since before the new car shortages started. That's like, a 200-week test drive forming a fairly substantial baseline for comparison, I'd suggest. As I see it, there are 8 rock-solid reasons to justify upgrading, and I'm on board with all of them. Or not buying a competitor, obviously. But there are also 2 significant speed humps on the road to acquisition, and one of them, dude, it really puts a dent in my overall enthusiasm for trading up to the new Triton. It also points to a broader impending crisis for the car industry generally, where they might have to decide to grow a pair and actually put their customers first. This video brought to you by the Manscaped Groin and Go bundle, a kind of upstairs, downstairs grooming solution featuring the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra and the Handyman Compact Face Shaver. The star of the show, the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra, definitely not your average trimmer. It's a powerhouse packed with 2 interchangeable skin-safe blade heads. The trimmer blade does the heavy lifting and you use it for fundamental hedge control. And I have to say, this thing is a real one-pass wonder, meaning you don't have to work very hard at all to achieve outstanding results quickly. And it's more versatile than you think too, because using these supplied combs, you can tweak the stubble anywhere from a fairly close cropped 1.4 millimeters up to a substantially relaxed 12, depending on how you roll. Speaking of which, if you want to go to literally the next level, check this out. You just snap off the trimmer blade and then you snap on the supplied foil blade and you really go to town smoothing things over. And it's waterproof, so this is a job you can do in the shower, making cleanup a breeze. It's also cordless with up to 1 hour of runtime on a single charge, which is quite the grooming marathon when you think about it. Plus, there's a bi-colour LED and a travel lock to prevent in-bag activation. This is the Handyman, which is more for upstairs. It's a kind of hybrid with a long hair leveler blade on this side to get a few days' growth under control quickly, and a foil blade over here for a really smooth close shave. Skin safe, waterproof, and USB-C rechargeable, just like the lawnmower, and also up to an hour of runtime. This is all super convenient at home, but it's also a dead set plus out on the road. See, the Handyman also comes with this 5-minute fast charge feature, so even dead flat, you plug it in, 5 minutes later, you're up and shaving again. So you have totally removed any stress about having to front up by circumstance at that all-important job interview or something with a half-shaved face. It's travel ready too, thanks to the magnetic blade cover. These are both brilliant devices aimed at presenting the very best version of you to ambient humanity. Go to manscaped.com/AutoExpert now. You'll get 20% off plus free international shipping using promo code AEJC at checkout. That's 20% off plus free international shipping with promo code AEJC at manscaped.com/AutoExpert. The Manscaped Groin and Go bundle. They just work. Before we get into my love-hate relationship with the new Triton, and dude, it's overwhelmingly love, but hate being such a powerful emotion, the small bits of hate are quite significant. Let us first put buying a new ute in perspective, shall we? Utes are especially tribal here in Australia, but the reality is that all of the popular ones are going to do what most people need a ute to do. Objectively, they'll all carry about the same stuff and perform about the same in the suburbs, off-road, whatever. They offer similar off-road performance and on-road comfort levels and similar fuel economy, whatever. The similarities, when you weigh it all up, exceed the differences, which are generally pretty nuanced. The differences between the popular utes like the Ranger, Hilux, D-Max and the She-Max or BT50, Mazda's D-Max clone, and the Navara, the differences are on the fringes, really. The core of what they're all capable of is mostly too close to call. So while every car maker can give you like 100 reasons why their particular shitbox is the only one that you should be considering, as machines, they're all going to do what most people need them to do. Like, for example, Ranger V6 has the grunt. Hilux has the resale value. Navara, with its independent rear suspension, has the on-road ride quality, especially unladen. But nothing's free, is it? The Ranger is thirsty. The Hilux is kind of mediocre. And the Navara doesn't tow as well or drive off-road as well or drive heavily laden as well. The Ranger V6 and the Triton can both drive in four-wheel drive high range on a high traction surface, and that's a real plus. The biggest difference between the mainstream utes, and you really only find this out if you have a problem after you buy it, is that some car makers are dead set snakes who will throw you under the bus in the name of profit, while some are actually pretty good at customer support, at least comparatively. Ford and Isuzu, for example, are dead set snakes. Also, they're the ones that are going to be under the most pressure from the government's new vehicle efficiency standard, the fuel economy regulations that you've probably heard about in the news. Isuzu in particular, I wouldn't be surprised if they just leave the country in 2027 or 2028 when complying gets just a little bit too hard / expensive to meet the ever-shrinking CO2 targets. Nissan, also terrible at customer support, dude. If you get a good one, great. If yours goes poopy, bad. Toyota can be kind of okay at customer support, but they're also not above lying to 250,000 plus customers when they get the fundamental engineering wrong. So that's kind of a roll of the dice, isn't it? But on resale value, Toyota is king. Volkswagen, hilariously enough, is a self-admitted criminal organisation. This is not an exaggeration. Mazda is kind of okay, and Mitsubishi is okay. They're real pluses in my book. And even though Mazda's She-Max is actually an Isuzu D-Max in drag, or a clone, whatever, the fuel efficiency standard will not cut Mazda off at the knees in the way that it probably will kill Isuzu. The first key point about the Triton, and many reviewers overlook this simply because they never actually buy a new car, is it's still great value. Triton GSR's about 64 grand before on-road costs. A Hilux Rogue is going to be about 71.5, and a Ranger Platinum is 79,000, I think. They're all before on-road costs, according to Redbook. And while I appreciate there are differences in spec across those three vehicles, it's still going to be $15,000 cheaper to drive away in a Triton GSR than it is in a Ranger Platinum. And the Triton is hardly poverty, right? This is one of the reasons why I bought the predecessor. It was a really compelling reason. When you're spending your own money on a vehicle, I justified buying the Triton by driving it away with $15,000 more cash left in my bank account, which to me, and I suspect I'm really not alone here, is somewhat powerful motivation. I remember reading the whole press pack when they launched the new Triton a few months ago, and I'm thinking to myself, well, thank God it didn't get Navarified. This was my principal concern months to years out when I knew the new one was coming, okay? Because the way the Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi alliance works, some bean-counting plonker could easily have flipped the coin, or however they do it, and had it land tails up instead, and we could all be looking at a hastily rebadged Nissan Navara. And I didn't want that. I so didn't want that. Thankfully, that did not actually occur, and in particular, thank the Lord, or I don't know, Michael Chiklis, who currently answers my prayers about as often as Jesus did previously. Go figure. Thank someone, anyway, that the new Triton still has the Super Select 2 transfer case, which allows all-wheel drive on high traction surfaces. This is such a plus, which only the V6 Ranger can match, albeit for thousands of dollars more. Now, the first thing you notice when you jump in and actually drive the new Triton, or at least the first thing I noticed, the powertrain is so much better than the old one, much better than the numbers might suggest off the bat. The engine capacity remains the same at 2.4 litres, but there's 2 turbos now instead of 1, right? And the peak power has climbed from 133 kilowatts to 150. Peak torque went from 430 to 470, I think. But the vehicle did get about 120 kilos heavier as well in terms of its curb weight. So this is a welcome, I suppose, but not astonishing improvement numerically. But it's so much better to drive. It's so much smoother, more linear, more progressive, and a whole lot quieter. Essentially, what I think is happening here is that the twin turbo setup gives a major boost in mid-range power, with that full 470 newton meters available from way down at 1500 RPM up to 2700. While in the previous engine, which I'm driving, the maximum was 430 newton meters at a particular point, which was 2500 RPM. So physics says power equals torque times revs, essentially. You have to dodgy up the units a bit, convert to radians per second, take away the number you first thought of, but that's how it works. Power is a product of torque and revs, literally. So the new engine gives you a lot more power across the range of revs at which you're more likely to be driving most of the time, and it is a significant improvement. The body is also a whole lot stiffer, or in this case it's the body and the chassis, but the platform, if you like, much stiffer. So there's a lot less of this shaking, rattling, rolling kind of disconcerting feedback when you drive, especially unladen, on typically shit Australian roads. I don't think any sane person would miss that, so that's a plus for upgrading, and I'd suggest well done, finite element analysis PhD dudes back at MMC Central. It's also a lot quieter and more refined as you kind of drive along through Shitsville randomly. Off the back of that, the increased platform stiffness means a better platform from which to tune the suspension and the steering, which is always such a plus in R&D. These two things, right, suspension and steering, are highly interactive, and it's actually quite difficult to draw a boundary between the two in your head when you're assessing a car, because they feed back into each other. The steering affects the suspension and Vicky Verka, basically. Both are substantially better, the steering and the suspension, but the steering in particular, in my book, has had such a major upgrade. It feels better on centre, and there's more of a feedback type connection with the wheels, which is kind of important if you class yourself as a driver. It's a really good upgrade there to overall dynamic performance, and that is a compelling reason, in my book at least, to upgrade from any predecessor to the new one. There's a huge improvement to the interior too. The transmission selector, so much better. The instruments, the switchgear, the layout, the overall presentation, well done. The center infotainment display, it's brighter, it's bigger, it's got better resolution, it's snappier in terms of its touch response, and the reversing and 360 cameras are awesome. They're very clear. you'd have to really try, I'd suggest, to collide with anything at low speed, either on or off-road. You know, precision parking, up your driveway, whatever. Driving up the Widowmaker and not making it and have to reverse back down. You know, all good with that camera system. Inside, there's a USB-C port as well, which has been added, and that's kind of cool. But don't stress, however, if you are a user of yesteryear's technology, there's still USB-A on offer too. Now, I'm not going to gush about the interior particularly because nobody gets paid to make the new model any worse, and the old one had a fairly mediocre interior at best. The new one is kind of contemporary, and that's pretty good. Mitsubishi has succumbed to the pressure and joined the unofficial arms race. It offers a Triton with 3.5 tonnes of maximum tow capacity now, so yay. I think it's fundamentally stupid to tow more than 2.5 tonnes with vehicles of this nature, however, just because the trailer, the heavier it is, the more likely it is to push the vehicle towing it off the road. And after all, trailers like caravans and, you know, all the other trailers that we typically tow, they're not dog-type trailers, they're pig-type trailers, which are intrinsically unstable in pitch and in yaw, and they rely on the vehicle in front to make them stable. So the more disparate the mass of the trailer is compared with the vehicle towing it, the more likely it is to take charge one day in the worst-case scenario, and that is a flat-out terrifying scenario. So, to me, this upgrade to 3.5 tonnes is probably the vehicle's most irrelevant sort of specification upgrade. But there does seem to be an underlying engineering upgrade underpinning that increase in tow spec, and that might benefit you more broadly no matter what you tow. I note that the wheelbase is like 130 millimetres longer and ground clearance is 8 millimetres higher on this new one. And I suspect what they've done is they've moved the rear axle slightly rearward, about 115 millimetres closer to the tow ball. Now, that might not sound like much, but it is kind of significant. What it's inevitably going to do is reduce the length of the lever arm through which the trailer can apply any inertial forces to the tow vehicle in pitch and yaw. Now, if you're hazy about all of that, here's a beer garden engineering translation. It's just going to have better fundamental towing stability. And I think we can all agree that that is unequivocally good. They've also increased the payload by a substantial 184 kilos. The new GSR has a 1,085 kilo payload. The Wild Track X, 918. A Hilux Rogue, 854. Now, all of these data are sourced from Redbook, so take it up with them if any of that is wrong. That's good if you want to carry stuff, Unequivocally good, but it's kind of bad if you want a novated lease, because there's a 999 kilo cap on payload capacity for any vehicle eligible for a novated lease. Just want to bear that in mind, depending on the way in which you want to own the vehicle. The Triton's not going to be any good for a novated lease. It's going to be ineligible, in other words. Just bear in mind, and a lot of reviewers get this wrong too, that the payload, which we just talked about, is not just how much freaking firewood or something you can jam in the tray. It doesn't work that way. The payload is the total mass of the things that you can put in or on the vehicle, including people, their luggage, any accessories you fit, like a tow bar or a bull bar or something, and the shit you throw in the tray, inevitably. So if you fit 150 kilos combined, front bar, tow bar, and roof rack, and you've got, I don't know, a 150 kilo wife, and you're 150 kilos, suddenly I'm seeing 2 white rhinoceri wrestling in a swag on the bank of Dingo Piss Creek, dude. And it's not a pleasant image. That's like 450 kilos less crap you can actually carry in the tray, because payload is a zero-sum game, And if you're also towing a 2.5 tonne acoustically transparent aluminium porter hovel with 250 kilos of tow ball download, that 250 has to come out of the payload as well, because the vehicle is carrying it. That would be a total of 700 kilos in this particular example before you put a single piece of shit in the tray, okay? That's how this works. So having extra payload can be a real plus at times. Exterior styling, like, who cares, right? Correct answer, almost everyone. Like, admit it, dude. You are a slave to ute fashion, just as much as a whole lot of Rosie in the left-hand seat is concerned with whether her caftan diminishes the apparent visual bulk of those buttocks. Same deal, dude. I would sidestep a conversation about this were I you. Listen to what I'm saying, like after 6 marriages, I know this shit. My other website, relationshipexpert.com. Unless, of course, Al Wars has that one. Where were we? However, I don't usually comment on styling simply because it's so epistemically subjective. And, of course, you have eyes, presumably, so you can probably see how it looks and therefore make aesthetic determinations on any new vehicle for your friggin' self. But I confess, I do harbour the prejudice that reviewers masturbating on camera, metaphorically, about how the grille looks, or similar, are giving you no more than dead air space with a host, I'd suggest, while also wasting your time and producing the raw material for a segment that I have always wanted to do called How Not to Review a Car. The only thing I will say about the exterior, right, and this is kind of important, is that they've done a nice job eliminating the previous curve where the floor pan meets the rear wall of the cab. Okay, in the predecessor, that was quite pronounced. It was very curvy, and I'd suggest dumbest curve ever on a ute, especially if you want to ditch the factory tub and fit a tray or a trade back or a camper, whatever aftermarket thingo on the back. In the predecessor, that curve made every add-on tray look like the shittest afterthought ever. Senior executive Mitsubishi stylists dusted off their finest speed square for this latest iteration of floor meets back wall, and I'd suggest it's a much better execution, dude. Well done to them. This is where my smile starts going a little upside down. Unfortunately, someone at MMC thought it was rather a good idea to add auto engine stop-start to this model of Triton. Pro tip, it's not. It's actually a fairly shit idea. Engines use all fuel at idle, dude. This is a scientific fact. So the potential benefit of this system is microscopic. If the restart was kind of instantaneous and smooth and the cost of implementation was low, then okay, might as well do it. But unfortunately, the restart takes a relatively long time in the circumstances, and it is anything but smooth. It's not classy. It's a pain in the frickin' arse. In fact, it's easy to get into a situation where you approach an intersection, then you stop briefly to check for approaching traffic, you see a gap, and yes, you go for it. Now, if the stop-start system overlaps this assessment of, stopping, assessing and going process, if it intervenes in the middle of all of that and you are kind of cognitively overloaded, the gap between you and the approaching vehicle, if it was only adequate to begin with, you can burn quite the significant window of opportunity with your foot on the gas, patiently awaiting a restart. You can burn, a second or two in this way easily if it intervenes at exactly the wrong time, because the engine can be shutting down when you decide to go, and it's got to wait to shut down and then get the command to restart. And this, subjectively, in that moment, takes forever. Like 1 second at urban traffic speeds is like 15 metres of that car approaching you. 2 seconds is 30 metres. That's a lot of slamming window of opportunity. It changes the equation of going for it or not many times, and it's not a pleasant change, let's face it. In fact, it is a right pain in the arse, and there is no tangible benefit. You will not be able to measure the fuel that this kind of bullshit system saves. You can, of course, shut this system off, so that's nice. There's a button, it's kind of low down on the right. You just reach down and press it, and the system is deactivated. Unfortunately, though, it reverts to active every time you get in the fucking car. It's awful. This feature in particular, the reactivation without being commanded to do so, is awful. There's no tangible benefit to that, and it's badly implemented. Plus, part of me finds it just insulting that I am potentially spending the big bucks on a vehicle and yet seemingly not even allowed to set the car up the way I want it to work. I wouldn't tolerate this with my phone or my freaking computer. I don't want some plonker back in Japan deciding that these systems will revert to the factory default every time I get in the car. I really hate that. Finally, and I suspect this is a real deal breaker for me, here's the biggest problem that I see with living with the new Triton. The speed hump between me and trading my old one in on the new one, which is so vastly superior and so much better in so many objective ways, all of which I love without reservation. So this is a real tragedy right at the end, is it not? There is a camera on the top of the steering column, and what it does is it watches you as you drive. And by watches you, I mean stalks you constantly. The first time I became aware of it, right, I'm at this T-junction, and it's not a 90-degree one. It's like I'm driving up the stem of a T, and it's at about 70 degrees to the top of the T, and I've got to look right up the acute angle to the right, this way, to check that nobody's approaching hell-bent on killing me before I turn into the intersection. Like, that's the way T-junctions work, right? You have to physically turn. And when it's at an angle, you have to turn a lot. Your head moves a lot. And you do this so that you can turn safely without impinging on anybody else's right to proceed through that intersection, right? That's the way they wrote the T-junction laws in Australia. So I'm doing this, I look this way, it's all good, and then there's a chime, and the message centre turns orange, and I see it in my peripheral vision. I go, this could be important, dude. So I check it out, okay, as you do in a vehicle that you haven't driven much before. First time it happens, you go, So it's a message helpfully instructing me to look straight ahead for the sake of safety, like, if you don't mind. And all of a sudden, I felt like the car was the parent and I was the child, and I friggin' hate that. My first impression was words to the effect of, this is totally fucked. I'm getting like 20 of these messages a day, ultimately, and I'm a person who takes paying attention and safe driving very seriously indeed. I actively strive not to goof off behind the wheel. So I don't goof off. The traffic environment is really important to me when I drive. So in the 2 weeks I'm driving the Triton, and I had a GLS for 1 week, and I swapped it for a GSR, and I had that for the second week. So it's not just one vehicle with a dodgy camera malfunctioning. They both annoyed the shit out of me absolutely identically. I had dozens of these friggin' warnings, and I'm completely over it, okay? This was a very wet, gloomy couple of weeks too, I might add, with very even lighting. There's no bright sun, lots of rain, stuff like that. So that's easy for a camera to cope with. And then, right, things got worse. A couple of days just before the GSR goes back, the sun comes out and the weather reverts to more or less typical Shitsvillian brightness. And things got even worse. I'm taking wife number 6 back from a doctor's appointment, like from the appointment to our home. This is only about 8 Ks through suburban streets and arterial roads. Like, nothing tricky, okay? Not a demanding driving environment. And I'm heading kind of northwest, and it's May and it's the afternoon. So the sun is kind of low and it's coming through the windscreen in part and past the A-pillar, you know. This is how that works. The top half of my head is often in the shade and the bottom half is in the sun as a consequence. And there's a lot of contrast across that scene, and that is kind of hard for cameras to keep up with. And I'm wearing a cap and sunnies, both of which is allowed. I'm not wearing my Darth Vader fucking mask. I'm just wearing a cap and sunnies, and the sun is out, okay? 8 Ks. I get 14 chimes and corresponding orange warnings that said, in this case, I'm paraphrasing, the camera can't detect your face, dude. And I've got two basic responses to this, let's call it feedback or advice, right? A, my face is right there still, motherfucker. I just checked. And B, really not my problem that you can't see my face. I don't need to know that the system cannot see my face. I need to concentrate on driving the freaking car, obviously. So, to me, this is beyond just fucked when you think about it. Here's what I would call a human factors analysis for the plonker who signed off on this implementation, okay? When you make the message center flash orange and you play a warning chime, what it does is it rips the driver's attention away from the core task of concentrating on the traffic environment which might evolve and kill someone. So intervening in this way, choosing to intervene, that would want to be a carefully taken decision, would it not? Considering that if a child steps out at this exact moment or a truck breaches a stop sign, it's going to compromise potentially everything. And it's going to do that in the worst possible way. So you would want to minimize the nature of these interventions and make them essential information only as much as physically possible, would you not? It strikes me that Mitsubishi's had this team of very impressive engineering PhDs devoted to developing the new Triton, right? And they've done this with diligence for several years. They've made prototypes endlessly and they've tested engines to destruction. They've done numerous iterations. They've done endless R&D, finessing this and that, and they want the vehicle to be the best Triton it can be. And they've generally made the new Triton so much better than the old one, like so much better. And they've done this to give you a fistful of rock-solid reasons to buy one, dude. And they've come in at a price point that represents excellent value, which is, let's face it, that's another major victory. Straight through the posts, on the full. So why have they let into production such a half-assed driver stalking system that admits to you how shit it is every time you drive it in the sunlight by telling you that it just can't detect your face? Still here, motherfucker, on top of my friggin' neck. Why have they done that? Because for me, and possibly you also, this would be a compelling reason not to buy this vehicle. And the simple answer is ANCAP. All of these other improvements, the powertrain, the payload, the steering, the stiffness, the upgrade to the interior, whatever, they are focused authentically on you, me, whoever, the potential buyer of this vehicle. And they impress. They really impress. But this driver stalking camera abomination is about getting 5 stars from ANCAP, and only about that, which they need, obviously, to sell the vehicle into various fleets. It doesn't matter that the system is badly implemented or supremely ineffective, won't make driving any safer, and just pisses you and me off every time we drive. It doesn't matter that there's no engineering standard for systems like this. They can be as bad as any car maker likes. In ANCAP's fucked up universe, it just matters that this system is installed. It's like this: driver monitoring system, check. One more tick in the box on the road to 5 stars on safety, which the new Triton is, incidentally. So well done there in terms of crashworthiness and other stuff that matters. It's a very safe ute. So big tick for that as well. But it doesn't matter that there's no evidence that systems of this driver stalking nature will save any lives or have ever saved anyone's life. In fact, what this system does in practice is it trains you to ignore it. And even if you can turn it off, even if you can, I didn't check, but because even if you can, it'll reactivate every time you get back in. Otherwise, no 5-star safety rating. That's how this works. ANCAP specifically mandates that. It's got to resort to active on restart, okay? And this just guts me because this system is so fundamentally useless and at the same time so impossibly fucking annoying. It also offends me as an engineer, right? It's shit. Its implementation is shit. Once every 500 to 600 metres over an 8K drive can't detect your face, dude. Like, fuck that. Sorry. Unacceptable. It guts me because ANCAP is not actually a regulatory body, but the car industry lets ANCAP pretend that it is. ANCAP thinks it is the dog, simply because the car industry just lacks the balls, and it just defaults to acting like the tail, okay? Every car maker in this country lets ANCAP tell it when and how to wag, and that is fucked. And that's what you're seeing across the whole spectrum of new 5-star cars. The Triton is not alone. They're all annoying in subtly different ways, but Jesus Christ. The person whose job it is to tolerate the insertion of the spiky end of this driver-stalking pineapple is, of course, the owner of the car. That would be you or me, dude, whomever. We are the ones who have to tolerate this shit. Just to play devil's advocate for Mitsubishi here, I get why they did it. 5 stars is very important commercially, but the implementation remains shit, and in terms of actually offering you a tangible safety benefit, which is all that I really care about, it's nowhere. It doesn't function like that. And it's not just a Mitsubishi thing, okay? I'm not just singling them out. This is just a particularly egregious example of fucked up incentives in the specification of cars, right? By ANCAP. This is simply the shape of cars to come. It's going to get more infuriating, right? Unless something is done to invert the dog-tail orientation of ANCAP and the car industry. Fundamentally good cars, like this new Triton, are going to come to you packed with annoying safety tech that doesn't actually make driving appreciably safer at all, simply because a bunch of non-regulatory plonkers hold the keys to a 5-star rating system and they make it up as they go along. And the way they act would make Don Corleone himself proud. I was all for upgrading to the new Triton, don't get me wrong. I wanted to love it, and I do mostly love it. I really do, don't get me wrong. But I would have to dig so freaking deep to make friends with that bullshit driver-stalking, annoying camera technology. I'd have to find a way to disable it permanently. And it just shouldn't work like that. There has to be a better way to do this.